presentation is going to cover a brief overview of defining sustainability, and then move into drivers for traceability, the leather supply chain, some sustainability challenges within the leather supply chain, and finally we're going to conclude with our traceability solution and how that can be used and how it can drive benefits within your business. So when starting to look at this question of sustainability and how traceability fits within that wider consideration, it's very important that as an organisation you define what the word sustainable means for you. It's fair to say that this word is used a lot in business, and it's also fair to say there are multiple different interpretations of it. In fact, there's probably multiple different interpretations within your own organisation, unless you've done an active process for defining it for yourself. Just to give you an indication of this, this definition is a perfectly reasonable definition of sustainability, something to be able to be maintained at a certain rate or level. It doesn't have any kind of ethical or environmental connotations associated with it. Some people believe this to be the meaning. It will often not be the meaning because many people associate a wider interpretation. For example, conserving an ecological balance by avoiding depletion of natural resources. Well, this is a very environmentally focused definition of sustainability and one that increasingly is becoming understood. You'll also hear it just being upheld as defended as good practice. Oh, it must be good because it's sustainable, without really defining what that means. And you'll hear that a lot in industry. I think the best definition is something that goes along the lines of this, something that enhances social capital through the balanced use of economic capital without depleting environmental capital. What that does is it brings together the three pillars of sustainability around social implications, environmental impacts, and economic considerations. And really, from a business perspective, I believe this is the most comprehensive definition of sustainability. But as I say, the most important thing to do as a starting point is to start understanding what definition of sustainability is right for your organization, and then starting to implement it as a result. So it's also fair to say that sustainable thinking is no longer a peripheral attitude. It is actually becoming well recognized as simply good business. Increasingly, sustainability is how well-operated organizations work. And by integrating it effectively, you can add commercial value and brand differentiation within your organization. Telling an authentic message, though, is absolutely key in sustainable reporting. It's if you make a message which isn't authentic or isn't somehow not true, then it's definitely a risky approach. So we would always recommend making sure that whatever you publicly say around sustainability, you can back up with measurable claims. And I think with sustainable organizations, those who understand sustainability and their proper impacts have recognized that the majority of their impact is actually within their material supply chain and the end of life of their products. So organizations should and can look at their immediate impacts, as in their stores, if they have stores, or their operations that they are in control of. But really, it's how their products and how they can influence their products upstream and downstream of their immediate operations is really where the greatest sustainability impacts and improvements can be found. And without understanding where your supply chain exists and where your materials are being originating from, it's very, very challenging to understand what this impact is. And really, that's where traceability starts to come in, because if you have a good system of understanding the route of supply of your materials, how your materials are made, where they're made, who's making them, who's involved in that process, then you can be in a good place to start understanding what the potential risks might be and also starting to respond to those risks in an effective way. And this is really what this presentation is going to look at in a bit more detail. It's great to see so many of you on the call today, and I think it's an indication and reflection of how much traceability is currently in the general consciousness. And the reason for this is multifaceted, but there are certainly several distinct drivers that are really bringing people to come and understand the importance of traceability. One of those is growing awareness of environmental and social challenges. This presentation here, we're going to talk specifically about leather and the leather material and the challenges associated with leather. But traceability challenges and environmental challenges are true for all materials. Increasingly also social challenges. So, you know, as I say, this is focusing on leather, but if you use cotton in your supply chain, you'll, I'm sure, be considering the social implications of the cotton supply chain right now, because that is a very, very on point topic. So these large-scale international environmental and social challenges are starting to drive people towards looking to understand their the traceability of their materials better. Also, if you're looking to get investment within a business, investors are increasingly asking for evidence of good traceability systems to ensure that what they're investing in has a sustainable future. And so having a good traceability system, understanding where your materials come from, is often a question now around successfully achieving new investment. New legislation is coming in online all the time. There's new legislation appearing in Europe right now that is demanding organizations to have a better control of their supply chains. And the only real way to do that initially is through effective traceability. You'll also find, depending on where you sit within who your customers are, if you are supplying to business customers, they may well have their own traceability demands. In fact, you may be on this call because you're getting asked questions by your customer around how you're supplying or sourcing materials. So that is a particular driver right now. And to a certain extent, even consumers are starting to ask these questions as well, although that is probably limited to a small number, but those can be a vocal number, that small number, and awareness within consumers of particularly the environmental and social challenges is growing. And also industry programs. So for example, I've got their textile exchange, but other industry programs and certification programs within the materials sector are increasingly requiring an effective traceability system as part of achieving a certification. So all these different drivers are pushing people to start looking at understanding what their supply chain looks like and to start integrating traceability. And an effective form of traceability can form the basis of a strategic response to managing risk within your supply chain. So as I said, we were going to look at leather in this presentation. As I say, all materials have their own unique challenges within their supply chain. So it would be too big a presentation to go into different materials today, but this is the leather one, although there are obviously other ways of understanding the material supply chain for other materials, but leather as an example. So this is a sort of an overview of how the leather industry works in general. Big drivers of the leather raw material, so this is the raw hide in the case of bovine, are countries such as South America, Brazil, Argentina, United States, Australia. That material will often be semi-processed before being shipped to Asia, where it will undergo leather manufacturing processing. That might be finished in Asia. It might also be moved to Italy for finishing before being further transported into actual product manufacture. And the reason why I'm explaining this is what you can see is the flow of materials for the leather supply chain, first of all, is a global flow. All countries in the world have a livestock industry. And as leather is a byproduct of the livestock industry, all countries in the world potentially could be the source of raw material for your leather products. But secondly, what we're saying here is there is a significant amount of flow between the processing steps. And I think a good example of this is the Italy leather industry. So the Italian leather industry is one of the most established leather industries globally. It has a brand reputation all of its own. But if you look at the Italian livestock herd, it could only service a maximum of 10% of the leather industry within Italy. What that means is at least 90% of leather produced in Italy originates in its raw form outside of Italy. And so what we would like to say to organizations who are buying leather products is that it is unlikely that the leather product you're buying, the raw material originates in the country that you're buying that product from. And without doing some kind of traceability exercise, it will be challenging for you to understand really where that material is originating, and therefore how you understand how to start managing the challenges potentially associated with it. To give you an idea of scale, these are the real results of a supply chain that we mapped for a major footwear retailer. So they had 40 tier 1 leather suppliers within their supply chain that they were sourcing their material from. Those leather suppliers were in turn sourcing from 160 tanneries who were sourcing from 480 different slaughterhouses. Now, those slaughterhouses, we estimated, were sourcing from up to 1.2 million tier 4 farms. Now, those tier 4 farms, they may be finishing farms, they may be indirect farms, but a significant number of farms within that supply chain, with the potential footprint of up to 24 million cattle. Now, we're not saying that every single one of those animals was in that footwear brand's supply chain, but the potential impact of that footwear brand was of this kind of scale. And what this shows you is the number of organizations, the complexity of your supply chain grows the higher up you go away from your organization. This is a schematic of how the leather industry works. So over on the right-hand side is probably where a lot of you sit. So brand and retail, or potentially product manufacturing space. And you'll have a good idea of who you are sourcing from, as they are your direct suppliers. You may have some understanding of the leather suppliers behind those, the finishing leather suppliers. You may source directly from those finishing leather suppliers. Those finishing leather suppliers may in turn have a good grasp of the semi-processing behind that. But as you can see, the leather manufacturing stage is multi-stepped. Some organizations take leather all the way from the rawhide through to the finished leather, but you can have every single step in between, and you can have multiple different organizations within that space. And due to the fact there are multiple potential different organizations there, they are all potential additional steps within your supply chain. Beyond that, you have the slaughterhouse, which is really where the raw material for leather originates as the byproduct of the livestock industry. And beyond that, you get into the farming stage, so the livestock industry. And you can have fattening farms, which are farms which supply directly to the slaughterhouse. That's where the slaughterhouse is servicing. But behind that, you potentially might have multiple different smaller fattening and calving farms, which are bringing the animals to the right slaughter weights in order to be moved to the slaughterhouse. And what we would say is, at present, the target for most organizations doing a traceability exercise for the leather industry should be trying to get back to that slaughterhouse level. It is sometimes possible to get beyond that if there are good in-country systems for the livestock, for traceability of livestock, but it is challenging primarily due to the fact that leather is a byproduct of the livestock industry, and often any traceability which exists within the animal, the live animal, travels then with the value product of that animal, which is the meat or the dairy. It doesn't tend to travel with the hide, and that is a challenge for the leather industry right now. But regardless, getting back to that slaughterhouse level is a really good achievement, and you can make a lot of progress in terms of managing the potential risks and get a better understanding of your supply chain by identifying the locations of those slaughterhouses within your supply chain. So I mentioned we would look a little bit briefly at some of the sensitivities and challenges for leather as a material, and I'm not going to dwell on this in any great detail, but just to give you an idea of why it's important to look up the supply chain and what the potential challenges that are maybe outside of your immediate or direct control, but are ultimately something that you need to be aware of and need to start to maintain usage of leather in your portfolio. These are sort of the key environmental and social challenges for leather. So first of all, you have the carbon footprint of the material. Leather is a byproduct of the meat industry. The meat industry is a carbon intensive industry. So understanding what the right allocation of that carbon footprint of the livestock is on the leather is an important determination for understanding where leather sits within your product portfolio. And there are various different interpretations of that, but having some understanding of that is important. And knowing where your materials come from will also have an impact in understanding what your carbon footprint could be. Deforestation is a key driver towards traceability for the leather industry right now. Deforestation does occur as a result of illegal cattle herding in parts of the world. And it is a potential challenge for the leather industry, and one that our tool particularly, we are looking into helping our clients understand what their potential risk is for potential for deforestation or material from a deforested area entering into their supply chain. Excuse me. Leather is a unique material relative to a lot of the other materials that it's in the competitive space with, in that it's an animal-based material, and therefore the welfare of the animal is a crucial question for how an organization or a brand is able to sell a leather material confidently. And understanding where that leather comes from in its raw material state, as in the live animal, is very important for understanding the potential animal welfare challenges within your supply chain. The value of hide fluctuates dramatically. Again, leather is a byproduct of another industry, so the volume of available material isn't dependent on the demand of the leather industry. It's dependent on the amount of demand for meat. So due to that, the value of the hides change, and that's unusual compared to a lot of other materials. Most other materials have a relative consistent price, whereas leather, the price of leather does change over time, and that can be a challenging thing to manage from an economic perspective. If you use exotics in your supply chain, these have their own challenges associated with them because they're not byproducts. So by exotics, I mean things like alligator or snake skin. These are materials which are farmed predominantly for their leather, for their skin. And so there's a different set of challenges associated with those materials. Then we start to move into the actual manufacturing side of the leather industry. So you've got leather as producing leather is a chemically intensive process. And understanding how the chemistry in and chemistry out is managed through chemical management, effluent treatment, is important to understand how well that leather is being made from an environmental perspective. And engaging with organizations such as the Leather Working Group within your manufacturing base is a great way of controlling that. Leather is produced in regions which do have modern slavery challenges. We're not saying that modern slavery is within your leather supply chain, but there is a potential risk for that, as with many different manufacturing industries. And NGOs are helping the wider population, consumers, become more aware of these issues, which is again putting pressure on the industry to respond effectively to some of these challenges. We also have the factor around worker environment, which is linked to the manufacturing stage. As opposed to the environmental perspective, it's the social perspective. So are the employees within your manufacturing supply chain being treated in an ethical manner? And then finally, you get to the other end of it. So you're looking at the waste management. What happens to the waste that's produced in your supply chain? What happens to the waste, particularly at the end of life of your product? These are the sort of questions that without understanding where your materials come from, it's hard to understand what the potential risk footprint you have. And finally, we have the fact that there are alternative materials to leather coming onto the market regularly. And these alternative materials are putting pressure on the leather industry to improve its environmental and social performance. Which is a positive thing for the industry in the sense that it's helping to look at these issues and bring these issues to the forefront. So what we would say is to help you understand and manage those issues, the first thing you should do is map. Once you've mapped your supply chain, you can know what it looks like. Once you know what it looks like, you can understand it. And by understanding it, you can respond effectively with an effective risk management plan. So this is how our product works. So our traceability product. We've developed this product over 5 years now. We've well established now in the industry. We recognize using our expertise as material specialists, we're able to bring that to bear on the understanding of the traceability of the materials. And we believe that makes us a good partner for you. We also recognize that most organizations, traceability isn't a core activity of what you do, whereas we do understand traceability, so we can help jump you to a solution quickly that could potentially take a significant amount of time and internal capacity if you try and do it yourselves completely. We work in a collaborative space, so we would like to work to understand what is the objectives that you're trying to understand, what are the particular focus areas, is it environmental challenges, are you looking from a commercial perspective, what's the driver behind looking at traceability for you? We develop a questionnaire which asks the right questions for you and also the right questions of the industry to understand who the actors are within your supply chain. Our questionnaire is an online tool, and one of the advantages of that means that, first of all, it's very easy to complete by the suppliers. It also means that it produces quality data that we can compare. And we're able to track live as those responses come back in, so we can see which parts of your supply chain are engaging and which potentially might need a bit of support. We always ask our clients to distribute that questionnaire through an effective form of engagement that we can support with, but you are the customer at the end of the day of those suppliers, and therefore you have the influence. When we receive the data, we do a validity check on it. We check to make sure that it makes sense. We check to see any Leather Working Group status on there. We then build a supply chain map, which pulls all of this data into a very usable, easy to understand space. And we do some analysis on top of that, our data analysis and our risk assessment. And then finally, we hand that over to you in a form of an interactive presentation. And we encourage you to involve as many stakeholders within that presentation as possible, as this is an information share, and the more information you're able to share from it, the more effectively you can use this, use this information within your business. It can take up to 6 months to do a project like this. It's not a quick exercise, but we say it's important to understand that it's a relatively, it takes a few weeks, few months to do it properly, but that information is very valuable once you've produced it. To give you an indication of what a supply chain map can look like, this is a very, very high level indication. So in most cases, we would expect a far more populated map than this. In fact, if you were to do 10 of your tier 1 suppliers, we would often expect to see upwards of 200 different organizations identified as a result of that kind of exercise, and with multiple different connections within those 200. But what you can see here from this screenshot, this is an interactive tool. This is just a screenshot here, but we have an interactive tool. It shows that the supplier located in this case in the UK is sourcing from 2 key suppliers are located in red on this map, one in Europe and one in Asia. The European supplier is sourcing wet blue, also from Europe, who are then in turn sourcing their raw material predominantly from Europe and also from North Africa. The Asia supplier is located in terms of its processing, partly in Asia, but also predominantly in South America with a big footprint in Brazil. And that organization is also sourcing multiple different raw material sources within Brazil. So what we can do is we can then start to add a layer of analysis onto this. I mentioned that deforestation was a particular challenge within the leather industry. And what we do is we can add different layers of data on top of the data, layers of data on top of your supplier information once we understand where your suppliers are located. So in this case, what we've done is we've taken a slaughterhouse here. We have overlaid deforestation data by municipality within Brazil. And what that does is it tells us for each municipality the amount of deforestation in hectares and percentage forest loss that has occurred over the last 20 years. And what we can do is we can then feed that data in by adding a 100-kilometer radius around that slaughterhouse, which is an estimate of the likely distance that finishing farms will be transporting animals to service that slaughterhouse. And what that means, we can start to build a picture of the type of farms that slaughterhouse will be sourcing from, and therefore the type of material that could be entering into your supply chain. And by doing this kind of data analysis, we can start to pull together a list of suppliers that are potentially of higher risk. And as a result of that, organizations can go back through their supply chain and start to ask further questions. For example, what policies do these suppliers have in place, or these slaughterhouses have in place, to ensure that they're not sourcing from animals farmed within newly deforested areas, and how those policies, evidence that those policies are being met. So in conclusion then, by undertaking supply chain mapping and traceability, you can increase the visibility of your supply chain and better manage your supply chain, better manage risk. Our product produces data for your supply chain. We use our expert risk analysis to help you understand what that data means. And as a result of that, you can be more informed, make more informed decisions, respond to scrutiny, be able to respond to questions from a position of knowledge, and start to make informed decisions going forward as to how your supply chain should work in the future, where your areas of risk are. You can also get additional commercial benefits, for example, improvements to standardization, quality control, price negotiation, rationalization. There's multiple different potential benefits. Really, I think the important thing to take away from traceability, though, is it is a journey. When you start doing this, you start looking at it, you do need to maintain it. You also, as an organization, need to understand what the traceability information means to you before you can respond to it. Okay, so that's the conclusion of my presentation. I'm now going to hand you over to Fernando, who's going to take us through his next presentation. So, Fernando, I'll hand it over to you, and I'm going to stop sharing.